You don't belong here. Get out before I make you regret it. Those words would echo through courtroom 7B for years to come, but not in the way Officer Derek Stone expected. Attorney Maya Richardson stood at the defendant's table, her Louis Vuitton briefcase resting against polished mahogany, her tailored Navy suit speaking of success and preparation. She had argued 127 cases in this courthouse. She had won 94 of them. But today, she wasn't here as an attorney. Officer Stone blocked the aisle, his massive frame deliberately positioned to intimidate. He was 6 feet 4 inches, 240 pounds of authority unchecked by accountability. His partner, Officer Lisa Chun, stood behind him, her hand resting casually on her taser. Another one trying to play dress-up, Stone muttered loud enough for the entire gallery to hear. Probably stole that suit from her employer's closet. Maya's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. The composure she had learned from 15 years of facing men like Stone in courtrooms across the state. Officer, I'm here for the 9 a.m. docket. If you'll excuse me. Stone stepped closer, invading her space with practiced aggression. I don't excuse trash that walks into my courtroom. You got ID? Proof you're supposed to be here? Maya reached slowly for her briefcase, but Stone's hand shot out, slapping it from her grip. The briefcase hit the floor with a crash, documents exploding across the courtroom floor like accusations waiting to be read. What's in there? Stone demanded, his voice rising. Stolen credit cards? Forged checks? He grabbed Maya's wrist, twisting it behind her back with enough force to make several observers gasp. Chin moved in, pulling out handcuffs with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this dance too many times before. This one's resisting, Chin announced, though Maya hadn't moved. Her voice carried the rehearsed tone of an officer creating a narrative, building a justification for violence that hadn't yet occurred. Stone's open palm cracked across Maya's face, the sound reverberating through the courtroom like a gunshot. Her head snapped sideways, and for a moment, the world tilted on its axis. Blood trickled from her split lip, staining the collar of her expensive suit. Animals like you need to learn respect, Stone hissed, shoving Maya against the defendant's table. The handcuffs bit into her wrists, metal against bone, authority against flesh. Several people in the gallery pulled out their phones, recording the brutality unfolding before them. But Stone didn't care. He had done this before, dozens of times. The system always protected its own. Judge Marcus Pemberton, an elderly white man with silver hair and a reputation for being tough on crime, entered through his chambers. He took one look at the scene before him and frowned. What's going on here, Officer Stone? Your Honor, Stone straightened, his voice shifting to professional courtesy. We have a trespasser who became violent when asked to provide identification. I was forced to subdue her for the safety of the court. Maya tasted blood in her mouth, felt the throb of bruising already forming on her cheekbone. But she said nothing. Not yet. Her eyes, however, never left Judge Pemberton's face. Marcus, she said quietly, using his first name with the familiarity of someone who had every right to. We need to talk about your replacement. Judge Pemberton's face went pale. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Stone looked between them, confusion beginning to crack his confident facade. What the hell is she talking about? He demanded. Judge Pemberton ignored him, his attention fixed entirely on Maya. Governor Richardson, he said slowly, his voice hoarse with disbelief and horror. I didn't expect you until this afternoon. The words hit the courtroom like a wrecking ball demolishing a condemned building. Governor Richardson. The name hung in the air, impossible and yet undeniable. Stone's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then slowly, terrifyingly, comprehension. That's right, Officer Stone, Maya said, straightening despite the handcuffs biting into her wrists. Governor Maya Richardson. I've been in office for 8 months, but apparently, you haven't been paying attention to who runs this state. Chin's hand flew to her mouth. The phones in the gallery continued recording, capturing every second of what was rapidly becoming a career-ending disaster. Judge Pemberton moved quickly, his elderly frame suddenly animated with urgency. Officer Stone, remove those handcuffs immediately. Stone's hands shook as he fumbled for his keys. This can't be. Governor Richardson is standing right in front of you, bleeding from a wound you inflicted, Pemberton finished. And God help us all, because this is going to be a constitutional crisis. The handcuffs came off, and Maya rubbed her wrists where the metal had left angry red marks. She picked up her scattered documents methodically, her movements deliberate and controlled. Officer Chin bent to help, but Maya's sharp glance stopped her cold. I don't need help from officers who stand by and watch their partners commit assault, Maya said quietly. But I will need both of your badge numbers, your personnel files, and every arrest report you've filed in the past 5 years. Your Honor, Stone started, but Judge Pemberton held up a hand. Officer Stone, I strongly suggest you say nothing further without an attorney present. Anything you say right now is being recorded by at least a dozen phones, and I guarantee it will be used against you. Maya finished collecting her documents and stood, facing the courtroom. Her split lip was still bleeding, and the bruise on her face was darkening by the second. But she looked every inch the governor she was, authority radiating from her despite, or perhaps because of the violence she had just endured. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Governor Maya Richardson. Before my election, I served as the state's Attorney General for 6 years. Before that, I was a civil rights attorney specializing in police misconduct cases. Her eyes swept the gallery, landing on each recording phone. Today, I came to this courthouse to observe Judge Pemberton's proceedings as part of my judicial oversight initiative. I wanted to see how justice is administered in our courts, how our officers conduct themselves, and whether the systems we've put in place are actually protecting citizens. Stone made a strangled sound, but Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. Instead, I was assaulted, handcuffed, and publicly humiliated by an officer who made assumptions based on nothing more than the color of my skin. An officer who, I should note, showed no interest in examining my identification before deciding I was trash that didn't belong in his courtroom. Judge Pemberton had sunk into his chair, his face gray. Governor Richardson, I apologize. I had no idea. You had no idea because you didn't look, Marcus, Maya said gently but firmly. Just like Officer Stone didn't look. Just like far too many people in positions of power don't look when they see a black woman and make instantaneous judgments about her worth, her credibility, her right to exist in spaces of power. She turned back to Stone, who was now visibly sweating. Officer Stone, you call me trash. You said I was playing dress up. You implied I had stolen this suit. All before you knew anything about me except what you could see. That's not I didn't mean, Stone stammered. You did mean it, Maya interrupted. And that's exactly the problem. You meant every word because you've been trained by a system that allows officers like you to make those assumptions without consequence. She pulled out her phone, her movements deliberate. But Officer Stone, there are going to be consequences this time. Significant ones. I'm calling Attorney General Sandra Alvarez right now. This incident will be investigated by the state police, the FBI's Civil Rights Division, and an independent prosecutor from outside this jurisdiction. She looked like she was about to pass out. Judge Pemberton had his head in his hands. And Stone, well, Stone finally understood the magnitude of what he had done. Your Honor, Maya continued, addressing Pemberton. I'm going to need you to recuse yourself from any proceedings involving these officers. Obviously, I can't preside over this case either, given that I'm the victim. We'll need a special prosecutor and a visiting judge. Of course, Governor, Pemberton said quietly. Whatever you need. Maya turned to the gallery, to the dozens of phones still recording. I want everyone here to understand something. What happened to me this morning happens to people in this state every single day. The only difference is that I have the power to do something about it, and most victims don't. Her voice rose with passion. But that ends now. Today, I'm announcing a complete overhaul of police training in this state. I'm establishing an independent civilian review board with real power to investigate and discipline officers. And I'm pushing for legislation that will eliminate qualified immunity for officers who violate citizens' constitutional rights. The gallery erupted in whispers and murmurs. Stone looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. This incident, Maya continued, will be the catalyst for change. Not because it happened to me, but because it happens to so many people who never get justice, who never get believed, who never get their day in court. She touched her split lip gingerly, her fingers coming away bloody. Officer Stone, you wanted to know if I had ID. She pulled out her wallet and held up her governor's identification card, the official seal clearly visible even from across the courtroom. Here it is. Governor Maya Richardson, Commander-in-Chief of the state's National Guard, Chief Executive of 12 million citizens, and the person who now has the authority to ensure you never wear a badge again. Stone's legs buckled, and he grabbed the nearest bench for support. But Governor, he whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't know. Exactly, Maya said coldly. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You saw what you wanted to see, assumed what you wanted to assume, and acted on prejudices so deeply ingrained you didn't even recognize them as prejudices. Judge Pemberton finally found his voice. Governor Richardson, what would you like me to do? Maya considered for a moment. Clear the courtroom except for these officers and court personnel. We need to take official statements, photograph my injuries, and secure all video evidence from everyone who recorded this incident. She looked directly at Stone. And Officer Stone, you're going to sit right there in the defendant's chair while we process this crime scene. Because that's what this is now. A crime scene where a state governor was assaulted by a law enforcement officer in a public courthouse. The irony was almost suffocating. Stone, who had spent his career putting people in that defendant's chair, now occupied it himself. His face had gone from red to white to a sickly gray as the reality of his situation sank in. Chun stood frozen, clearly trying to calculate her own liability in the situation. Maya pulled out her phone again, this time calling someone else. Yes, this is Governor Richardson. I need a statement prepared for immediate release. Include photos of my injuries and a full accounting of what occurred this morning in courtroom 7B. And schedule a press conference for 2 p.m. today. She paused, listening. No, I'm fine. Well, not fine, but I'm functional. This is too important to delay. The public needs to know what happened here. Stone finally found his voice again, though it came out as barely a whisper. Governor, I'm sorry. I never would have if I had known your apology. Officer Stone, Maya interrupted, means nothing. You're sorry you assaulted the governor. But what about all the other people you've treated this way? The ones who weren't powerful enough to hold you accountable? She moved closer to where he sat slumped in the defendant's chair. Because let me tell you something, Officer Stone. I've been governor for 8 months, but I've requested and reviewed complaint records for officers across this state. Your name came up 23 times in the past 3 years alone. 23 complaints. Stone stared at his hands, unable to meet her eyes. 23 complaints of excessive force, racial profiling, and abusive language. All dismissed as unsubstantiated by your department. All filed by people of color. All describing behavior remarkably similar to what you displayed here today. Judge Pemberton was taking notes, his face growing more disturbed with each revelation. So no, Officer Stone, Maya continued, this isn't about you not knowing I was the governor. This is about a pattern of abuse that has been allowed to continue because the system protected you instead of the citizens you were sworn to serve. She turned to Judge Pemberton. Marcus, I want every case Officer Stone has testified in over the past 5 years reviewed. Every single one. If we find evidence of similar misconduct, those cases may need to be reopened. Pemberton nodded grimly. I'll have my clerk start pulling those files immediately. Maya's phone rang, and she glanced at the screen. Attorney General Alvarez. She answered, putting it on speaker so the entire courtroom could hear. Governor, Sandra Alvarez's voice was tight, with controlled fury. I just heard what happened. Are you all right? I've been better, Sandra, but I'll survive. More importantly, we have an opportunity here to expose systemic problems that have been ignored for far too long. I'm already mobilizing resources, Alvarez replied. FBI Civil Rights Division is being notified. I'm assigning our top prosecutors to the case. And Governor, I want you to know that every single person in my office is ready to back you on the reforms you mentioned. This ends now. Thank you, Sandra. Maya's voice was steady, but there was emotion underlying it. Let's make sure Officer Stone's victims get justice, not just me. She ended the call and looked around the courtroom. Over the next hour, paramedics arrived to photograph and document Maya's injuries. The split lip required 3 stitches. The bruising on her face would take weeks to fully heal. The marks on her wrist from the handcuffs were deep and angry. But Maya refused to go to the hospital. Not yet. There's too much work to do, she told the paramedics. I'll get checked out later, but right now, I need to be here. Stone and Chun were separated and questioned by state police investigators who arrived within 30 minutes. Their body cameras were seized as evidence, though Stone's had mysteriously been turned off during the encounter with Maya. Chen's, however, had been running the entire time, capturing every word, every action, every moment of brutality. The video was devastating. It showed Stone's unprovoked aggression, his racial slurs, the deliberate violence. But perhaps most damning was the audio of him speaking to Chen moments before approaching Maya. Watch this, he had said, his voice clear on the recording. Another uppity one thinking she belongs here. Time to teach her a lesson. The premeditation made it impossible to claim the assault was a split-second mistake or a reaction to perceived threat. Stone had decided to attack Maya before he even spoke to her, based on nothing more than her appearance. By noon, the story had exploded across social media and news outlets nationwide. Governor assaulted in courthouse, the headlines screamed. State leader handcuffed and beaten by officer. The photos of Maya's injuries went viral, shared millions of times within hours. But Maya insisted on controlling the narrative. At her 2 p.m. press conference, she stood before dozens of cameras, the stitches on her lip clearly visible, the bruise on her face undeniable. She didn't try to hide the evidence of violence. Instead, she made it the centerpiece of her message. Today, I experienced what far too many citizens of our state experience regularly. She began, her voice strong and clear. I was judged, assaulted, and dehumanized by an officer who saw my skin color and made assumptions about my worth, my character, and my right to exist in a space of power. The press room was silent except for the click of cameras. But I want to be very clear about something. I am not the victim here. Or rather, I'm not the only victim. I'm simply the victim who has the power to demand accountability and reform. The real victims are the thousands of people who have suffered similar treatment and never received justice. She outlined her reform proposals in detail. Mandatory body cameras that couldn't be turned off. Independent oversight boards with subpoena power. An end to qualified immunity. Extensive retraining focused on implicit bias and de-escalation. Significant consequences for officers who violated citizens' rights. And most importantly, Maya announced, I'm establishing a victims' compensation fund. Anyone who has been wrongfully arrested, brutalized, or had their rights violated by law enforcement in this state can apply for review and compensation. We're going to right the wrongs that have been swept under the rug for far too long. The press conference lasted 90 minutes. Maya answered every question, showed her injuries repeatedly, and never once made herself the hero of the story. Instead, she centered the countless unnamed victims who had never gotten their moment in front of cameras. Back at the courthouse, Stone and Chun were formally arrested, not by their fellow officers, but by state police who had no loyalty to the local department. Stone was charged with assault on a government official, civil rights violations, and deprivation of rights under color of law. Chun was charged with conspiracy and failure to intervene. They were processed, fingerprinted, and photographed just like the thousands of people they had arrested over their careers. The mug shots, when released, showed 2 officers who finally understood what powerlessness felt like. Stone's trial began 3 months later. Maya did not preside. That would have been impossible, but she attended every day, sitting in the gallery where everyone could see her. A reminder of what happened when officers believed themselves untouchable. The evidence was overwhelming. The video from Chin's body camera played in the courtroom, showing Stone's violence in excruciating detail. The audio of his premeditated comments sealed his fate. And then there was the parade of Stone's previous victims, 23 people who finally had a chance to tell their stories in a courtroom that would actually listen. Each victim's testimony followed a similar pattern. Stone had made assumptions based on race. He had used excessive force. He had lied in his reports. And the system had protected him over and over again. Until the day he assaulted someone the system couldn't ignore. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Stone was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His pension was revoked. His law enforcement certification was permanently stripped. And he was ordered to pay restitution to each of his 23 identified victims. Chun received 5 years for her role in the assault and her pattern of failing to intervene in Stone's abuses. Her career was similarly destroyed. But perhaps the most significant consequence came from the case review Maya had ordered. Of the 247 cases Stone had been involved in over 5 years, 89 were found to have serious constitutional violations. 89 cases where evidence was planted, where reports were falsified, where violence was excessive and unjustified. Every single one was reopened. 34 people were released from prison, their convictions overturned. Dozens more had charges dropped or sentences reduced. The lawsuits cost the city $47 million. Money that came directly from the police department's budget, forcing genuine reforms through financial necessity. Maya's reforms swept through the state legislature. Her approval ratings, which had been respectable but not exceptional before the assault, soared to 71%. Citizens across the political spectrum supported her changes because they had seen what happened when power went unchecked. Police unions fought back, of course. They claimed the reforms would make officers hesitant to act, would endanger public safety, would tie their hands in dangerous situations. But Maya countered every argument with simple questions. Are you saying officers need to be able to assault innocent citizens to do their jobs? Are you claiming that accountability makes policing impossible? Are you arguing that the ability to act without consequence is essential to law enforcement? The unions found they had no good answers to these questions, especially not while photos of Maya's bruised face were still circulating widely. Within a year, the reforms were law. The Independent Oversight Board began operations with a budget of $10 million annually. Body cameras became mandatory statewide, with footage automatically uploaded to secure servers that officers couldn't access or delete. Qualified immunity was replaced with a system that held officers individually liable for rights violations, with departments required to carry insurance that would drop coverage for repeat offenders. The changes rippled beyond Maya's state. Other governors, inspired by her courage and her reforms, began implementing similar systems. Police chiefs who recognized the need for change used Maya's model as a blueprint. Law schools added her press conference speech to their curricula as an example of how to advocate for systemic change. And Officer Stone, he spent his days in federal prison, surrounded by people he had helped put behind bars. The irony was not lost on anyone. He had plenty of time to think about the assumptions he had made, the lives he had damaged, and the moment he decided to assault a woman because he thought she didn't belong. Judge Pemberton retired 6 months after the incident, citing his failure to recognize the problems in his own courtroom. In his resignation letter, he wrote, "I sat on that bench for 28 years and never truly saw what was happening before my eyes. Governor Richardson's assault forced me to confront my own complicity in a broken system. I can no longer serve in a role where I failed so completely." Maya attended his retirement ceremony and shook his hand. "You're one of the few who had the courage to acknowledge the problem, Marcus," she told him. "That matters." His replacement was a former civil rights attorney who had spent her career fighting cases like Stone's. The change in judicial temperament was immediate and obvious. 2 years after the assault, Maya stood in that same courthouse, in that same courtroom, for a very different ceremony. The courtroom had been renamed the Justice and Accountability Courtroom, with a plaque outside describing what had happened there and why it mattered. Today, Maya said, addressing a room full of Stone's victims, their families, and reform advocates, "We gather not to celebrate what happened to me, but to acknowledge that justice, even delayed, can still be delivered." She gestured to the 34 people who had been released from prison, their wrongful convictions overturned. These individuals lost years of their lives because an officer decided he was above the law. No compensation can return those years, but we can ensure that their suffering leads to change that prevents future suffering. One of the exonerated prisoners, a man named Marcus Thompson who had spent 7 years behind bars for a drug charge Stone had fabricated, stood to speak. "Governor Richardson," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just save yourself when you stood up that day. You saved all of us. You gave us hope that the system could actually work, that someone with power would actually use it to help people like us." Maya's eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed in public. "Mr. Thompson, and all of you," she replied, "you survived a broken system. I just had the platform to force people to pay attention. The real heroes are those who kept fighting even when no one listened." The ceremony lasted 2 hours, with victim after victim sharing their stories. Stories of violence, of injustice, of a system that consistently chose to protect officers over citizens. But now, finally, they were stories with endings that included accountability and reform. When Maya finally left the courthouse that day, she paused on the steps where Stone had first assaulted her. The spot was marked now, not officially, but everyone knew where it had happened. This is where it started, she thought, where an officer's prejudice collided with someone who had the power to respond. She hoped it would also be remembered as where genuine change began. Because the truth was, Stone's assault had accomplished something he never intended. It had exposed the rot in the system so clearly, so publicly, so undeniably that even those who benefited from that system couldn't ignore it anymore. As Maya walked to her car, flanked by security that now accompanied her everywhere, she reflected on the past 2 years. The death threats from Stone's supporters, the attacks from police unions, the constant pressure from those who wanted to maintain the status quo, but also the letters from victims who finally felt heard, the statistics showing reduced complaints and use of force incidents, the slow, grinding progress of systemic change. It wasn't perfect. Systems built over centuries couldn't be dismantled in months or even years, but it was movement in the right direction. And sometimes, Maya thought, that's all you can ask for. One officer faced consequences. One system was forced to change. One state decided that power without accountability was tyranny, no matter who wielded that power. And it had started with a slap in a courtroom, delivered by an officer who thought he knew exactly who belonged in spaces of power and who didn't. He was wrong, and his wrongness, captured on video and witnessed by dozens, had become the catalyst for transformation. As Maya drove away from the courthouse, she glanced in her rearview mirror at the building where she had been assaulted, arrested, and ultimately vindicated. The system had tried to crush her, just like it had crushed thousands before her. The difference was, she had the tools to fight back. And fight back she did. Officer Stone learned his place that day. It was in a prison cell, stripped of the badge he had abused for so long. And Governor Maya Richardson learned something too. That justice, real justice, requires more than good intentions. It requires power, courage, and a willingness to tear down systems that protect abusers. She had all three, and she wasn't finished using them. Because that slap in the courtroom, that moment of casual brutality, had started a revolution. Not a violent one, but a necessary one. A revolution that said no more. No more protected abusers. No more unaccountable authority. No more victims without recourse. The fight would continue long after Maya left office. But she had started it, standing in a courtroom with a split lip and handcuff marks, refusing to be silenced or dismissed. And that, more than any law or reform, was her greatest legacy. The knowledge that power could be challenged, that systems could be changed, and that sometimes justice really does prevail, even when it starts with a slap.